Okay. Well, first of all, thank everyone for either taking time out of your evening or your morning, depending on where you're at, or your very, very late night if you're one of those. Today is the 12th of February, 2021, and we have Bram, myself, Mitch, and Chuck here to answer questions, talk through the business white paper, our pre-farm, our go-to-market plans, how the public company interacts with that, all those kinds of things. Let's get started with a question about our custody. Are we going to lock up our pre-farm, and what will that generally look like? Bram, you can kind of kick it off, and I'll take it after you.
Our pre-farm, well, we're keeping it in a very secure wallet. You mean just on a technical level? What are we planning on?
Yeah. This is the I'll outline, and you can explain kind of how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
We're going to have kind of two logical wallet sets. One is our international wallet, and one is our domestic US wallet. But then there's three sub wallets. There's a cold wallet, a warm wallet, and a hot wallet. And so, for example, the hot wallet will be the one that will make loans and do the kind of day-to-day business, where the warm wallet's there to add or subtract from the hot wallet, those kinds of things.
Oh yeah, well, we're going to be having we're going to be dog fooding our own custody arrangements. Unfortunately, we don't have all this implemented yet, so we're going to have to move stuff over to it. But we're going to have like gradations of security in our wallets, having to do with like how easily we can move the funds around. We're going to have our like super hot wallet where we can just move funds out of it. Although even that will probably be rate limited. And then we'll have like our super cold wallet, which requires going and physically getting access to some things to move stuff out. And that will also have things where whenever it tries to move funds out, we'll be able to see that it's trying to move funds out. And if we got hacked, we'll have a way of like undoing it from there. And this will all be auditable. So the thing that's of interest to the general community is like, how do we know you won't just start dumping coins? And one aspect of that is going to be that we're going to, once we finish putting it together, make public the tool chain we use to do this, so people can come in and audit that these things really are locked up the way we say they're locked up, and we just physically can't move the funds without a certain specified amount of lead time beforehand on those.
Yep. And I just add that, we will be very transparent about how those are locked up, but due to security concerns, I'm not going to be fully transparent exactly how it's finally and ultimately secured. Before we go on, I would like to introduce Chuck, and Chuck, give you a second to introduce yourself. Your first time on one of our webinars, and so go ahead.
Thank you, Gene. Hi, I'm Chuck Stoops, and I'm really pleased to be here. I'm an attorney and a finance professional by training. Had the good fortune to be with a lot of successful consumer brand companies as they were breaking out, PayPal, Skype, Netflix. And that's given me a great vantage point for to see how successful companies build winning culture, how they solve problems, how they continuously reinvent themselves, how they deliver value to their customers and to their shareholders. It's also given me a great vantage point to see how public companies operate, and the life cycle and the benefits and the burdens of that life cycle. And as you look around, this executive team, you see a lot of people who have, had some public company experience. And the idea of being a 34 Act reporting company is one of the, we're hoping that we have a path to that door eventually. And so we put together a team of people who have some experience in managing public company reporting and the rigors and the controls that requires. In terms of product, I'm really excited by what's being done by the Chia team. Probably excited for the same reason everybody else on this call is excited. It's a bit about the environmental, but it's also about advancing the art, right? It's about scalability, usability, programmability, security, all that good stuff. And having a great layer 1 base layer is going to unleash a lot of potential for layer 2 developers. And I'm really excited to see what's around that corner.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Mitch, you introduced yourself yesterday, but you're also kind of new to the crowd. So let's do that for Europe as well, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Gene. Mitch Edwards, the CFO and General Counsel of Chia. Have been with the company for about 2 years now. I have been with half a dozen emerging growth, internet, blockchain companies over the past 15 years. I've been CFO and General Counsel of Skullcandy, Razor Gaming, Overstock.com. We had a big blockchain crypto subsidiary. Was with Core Scientific, the largest Bitcoin mining company in North America. And prior to that was, like Chuck, started out as a lawyer on Wall Street doing transactions and IPOs, venture capital, private equity deals, mergers and acquisitions. And so bring kind of a both legal and financial background to what we're doing. And as you'll hear today, as we kind of lay out our roadmap, I think you'll see that this team, including Chuck and Gene's experience and then Bram's genius, is really one of the unique management board teams in blockchain cryptocurrency. Happy to be here.
Yep. I don't know if you heard Mitch when we were joking earlier, but this is virtually our first board meeting, effectively.
I'll take minutes.
Exactly. So an interesting question with a little bit of a twist that I hadn't thought about. What happens if there's a fork of the Chia blockchain and someone keeps the pre-farm in the fork? Will we put those controls on that too? So I think it's two questions. What do we think about forks, and what do we think about airdrops?
Well, yeah, it depends what you mean by fork here. So there have been these like different like forks of Bitcoin that have happened. And those are really new cryptocurrencies with a massive airdrop is what those really are. I think the world's a little tired of those. They're a gimmick that's a little worn out at this point. There's nothing we can really do to stop people from trying to do that. We can stop people from using the Chia name when they do it. And those things, of course, will be basically unmaintained. At least by us. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not anticipating very much of that going on just because I think the world's sick of it.
However, how do we feel about people adopting proof of space and time?
Oh yeah. So that's a very different question. There are other cryptocurrencies out there that have, as a matter of policy, have hard forks on a regular basis. We're not going to do that. But those ones do have the ability, or at least nominally claim the ability to change their proof of work function. And so they could switch to proofs of space and time. I'm expecting that they will. I think that after we're out there for some time and have really proven that proof of space and time is just a much more decentralized way of achieving consensus than proof of work is, that other cryptocurrencies will start adopting it. And as long as they use the same plot file format as we do, which I'm expecting all of them to, then that should work just fine. I think that's kind of a good thing, and it won't really cost anything to farm both for our blockchain and another one at the same time on the same plot files. You can literally have separate processes reading off the same files. There's nothing stopping you from doing it.
Yeah, and so everyone knows we are going to be working to integrate that no matter what, because we also want our testnet to be able to be done the same way. But in the grand scheme of it's real work and we have limited time, we're very focused on getting to mainnet right this second. Another set of questions are, hey, this is an interesting model around the Red Hat business model. Can you tell me a little more about how that works and what you're going to do there? And I'm going to field this one if that's okay. So Linux was a viable competitor to Windows NT back in the day, Solaris as well. And those were kind of the two things that were being run in enterprises and financial institutions. But until there was an entity that, the IT buyer could point to and call up and yell, and the old joke is a single throat to choke, you didn't see Goldman adopting Red Hat. Well, pardon me, Linux. But you did see Goldman adopt Red Hat when Red Hat was there to support that adoption. And we see, I mentioned this in the white paper, we have a very barbell market. It's either the smallest grassroots, crazy, cool new developer, or it's a national bank at a G30 country. And in that other larger case, they want to have that comfort of, they know that the company that they're buying software support from is going to be there when 4 years from now something comes up. They're going to want the training and the integration support. It's a critical kind of piece of getting blockchains used instead of internet blockchains to actually transfer real value. Related, so you talk about disseminating Swift. Are you talking about adding various Swift messages, or are you talking about developing on top? I actually think that the reality will be more that banks will do direct value transfer either on a stable coin or actually with raw Chia on a Chia network. When we talk to, investment firms that own large banks in Asia, for example, they're really excited about having a trustworthy, more decentralized and even potentially Bitcoin network where, we can't stop them. No one can stop them from transacting between bank to bank. And they can do that in a way that is nearly trustless even between the two banks. I think that's one of the big things that people are looking for. How it all gets implemented is an interesting question. That's where sort of like the software business comes in. We're going to help people figure that out. Let's see. Questions about, what's the ballpark for us doing an offering, Mitch? Let's talk about, obviously we can't predict a timeline exactly, and you can explain why, but what are the factors that kind of go into that?
Our goal long-term is to be different in our transparency and our openness with the community, with the public, compared to a lot of other fintech, DeFi, cryptocurrency, blockchain companies. And to that end, part of our plan is to do a registered public offering or register in a direct sale under the 1934 Act and become a fully compliant reporting public company. Timing on that, certainly after we launch, which is imminent, at which point I think the right way to do an IPO or to go public is to just keep our ear to the ground and be very aware of market conditions, institutional demand, global economic conditions, and health of our own industry. And I think that there's a multiplicity of factors that come into when you should actually go out. And so it's hard to say in advance when that might be. But if the conditions that exist right now, for example, persist this summer, we could see as early as this summer correspondence with the SEC and exploring that option. I think there does need to be a healthy demand for digital currency, which there clearly is right now amongst institutions. And I think there needs to be some stability when you look at the VIX, the volatility of the equity markets. That also plays a big factor. If it gets crazy volatile, it's harder to go out if there's some stability. So we will be looking from both an economic and a legal and an institutional demand perspective at what the world looks like starting this summer. And I think at any point, whether it's later this year, could even be next year, when conditions are right, we'll pull the trigger and register with the SEC and become a fully compliant public company.
Great. A really interesting question, Bram, and I think both of you and I have to kind of respond to this. Given the management team is a mix of cyberpunk hacker and old school corporate experience, how will the management team balance moments of tension between these two ethoses?
I mean, I don't think management is what a lot of people think it is. I mean, Being a manager is like an actual job with actual responsibilities. It's not this grandiose, like grandstanding celebrity thing that it's portrayed as being. So it seems kind of like a strange question to me.
Well, let me jump in, and then Gene, I want your answer to that too. But I think it's a delightful mix of those two. I think there's a kind of revolutionary, change the world attitude that we have within the company. The cypherpunks who are, hey, we're creating new rules. We are literally going to create a new, more efficient, more just, more egalitarian world where everybody can have access to money, to banking, to all sorts of things. But there's this also, and this makes it unique, there's a realism that to get there, there's something to going through the front door. And, we've seen it in the past few years in our country, kind of ways, how do you change things? How do you make an impact? And there are more effective ways than others. And sometimes storming the gates is not the right way to do it. And what we have is a team that that knows how to go through the front door, to talk to the SEC, to talk to FINRA, to talk to NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, regulators, Singapore Monetary Authority, these powerful financial players in the world will continue to be part in some way of the ecosystem. And I think our ability to sit down and have conversations with them enhances the likelihood that we are the cypherpunks that actually get admitted to the world financial community in a way that we can make a big change.
Yeah, I think you said what I was going to say, which is basically we're kind of cypherpunks with the pragmatic reality of trying to get this done. Ultimately, what we all want is a fully decentralized, no one controls blockchain infrastructure that moves wealth securely, easily, and makes like all money and money related things just easier to do. And it's interesting, and I want to actually turn it to Chuck, because one of the things that we had to do when we were looking for our board members was find people who truly believed in that vision, right? Because, it's not just enough to think, hey, blockchain's cool. It's more about, hey, blockchain is transformative if done right. And I would only add that we are somewhat surprised to find how much cypherpunk ethos you find inside major banks and government employees.
To your point, Gene, coming from, I think, some of those companies that were labeled old school, maybe it was a generation ago, but all of those companies rammed through barriers too, and we haven't forgotten what it felt like. And to your point about balance, though, when you're knocking on the doors of the SEC or institutional investors, investment banks, you're going to have to ring politely, no matter who you are. So I think it's all about having that right balance in the mix, and I think we're nailing it so far.
Great.
If I may add, we're not, all of us here have a lot of management experience. We're not a bunch of young guns here. I most certainly was at one point in my life. But we're people who have actually taken products to market and managed large teams of people already and have years of experience doing this. And I'm certainly at a point in my life where it's like, let's do just one crazy thing here, right? Like we're doing the one crazy thing, which is our fundamental thesis. But in terms of all the details, trying to be just really straightforward, basic, do good engineering, don't do anything crazy kind of stuff. And so like, as an example, like we're not even trying to add any privacy coin features for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being it's just too much stuff to even try to take on. We have enough problems just trying to like do basic improvements on Bitcoin as it is.
One of the things I've always said at this place is that we'd like to be relatively boring, because in the one or two places we're not boring at all.
Yeah.
And also, just some color, like, Bram and I accidentally were slowly but surely destroying the record business from both ends. So, we've kind of done this before and know how to kind of go out and disintermediate things. And we think we can bring that to the financial industry, which needs it pretty badly. Let's see. I had a fun one. Can I put Chia pets on colored coins?
No crypto.
Yeah, Chia pet colored coin is absolutely something you can build. Another question is, does Chia have some ability to stop the blockchain? Are we truly decentralized, Bram?
Yes, we are. We are using Nakamoto consensus, and well and truly, no nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If we were all to just once we're launched, which we're not yet, but
almost
once we're launched, and once we have this slightly staged plan of before once
transactions are flowing there.
Yeah. Then we could all just drop dead and the blockchain would just keep running in perpetuity. That's a real thing. That is the whole point of the whole exercise, is to make that be actually true and give people actual confidence that that is true.
Yeah. So interesting question came out of Keybase. Assuming that we do get public and get effective comfort with the regulatory environment, what's the actual mechanism that we're going to use to get Chia coins, to the shareholders? And I think that's probably me, because what we're probably going to do is actually make a colored coin equivalent of Chia equity, so that you can go through our transfer agent and turn in your physical certificate and get an actual digital certificate. For people who don't do that, then you'll just go to the transfer agent and prove that you're the shareholder in question, and then they will accept a wallet transmit address that they would then send the Chia to.
Yeah, worth reiterating that we're not distributing any actual Chia coins.
This is if we were to do a dividend is the question, right? How would that work, right? But basically the answer is that we're going to have a slightly more sophisticated transfer agent, and these kinds of processes are actually pretty well known and have been done before. It will be either the really cool version where it just kind of shows up because you've put your stock in our colored coin stock, or you'll have to just go to the transfer agent and give them instructions to send you your Chia. We may also have an ability for you to choose cash instead. That's an implementation detail we have to kind of look at as we get closer to that. But, let me be very clear, that is post completing an offering, and probably, a good at least a year or two after that offering. One of the real goals, and one of the reasons people are looking at the token emission schedule and going, oh my gosh, the company's gonna have X% of all Chia. We intentionally have a lot right this second because we want to use a decent chunk of it to reward the broad shareholder base when it's public. We want to have, T. Rowe Price and the California CalPERS and the Toronto Teachers Pension Fund be the recipients of a Chia dividend, so that you're talking about effectively putting, a large amount of a small amount of Chia in a large amount of hands. And those people who are receiving them were the ones willing to step up and buy the stock. So tell us about Gemini and Coinbase and Kraken. Where are you going to be listed, and when and how and why? And I'll let Mitch respond.
Well, to date, I have fielded a lot of calls and inquiries from exchanges. We're not calling them, they're calling us. I think that Bram's reputation globally is such that there's a lot of awareness of what we're doing. I think there's some question as when is it going to actually happen, because there was buzz a couple of years ago and it is continued, but we get the continual inbound inquiries from exchanges about when are you going to launch. I believe the exchanges believe there will be quite a demand for Chia, given its heritage and who's behind it and its features. So we don't know precisely. The big exchanges won't sign an agreement until we launch, although we have draft agreements with them. But I'm quite confident that there will be a multiplicity of exchanges that pick us up immediately. And then I think once we are launched and they see value emerge and they see trading, the larger exchanges will get to signing those agreements. So likely, you know, fairly shortly after launch, there will be an increasing number of exchanges on which Chia will be exchanged.
Yeah. So are we going to be able to use the pre-farm to reward farmers? Are they going to be able to buy stock? The answer to the both questions is that we hope yes to both, but let me give you some caveats. We cannot really use the pre-farm until we have regulatory certainty. So, you know, we even thought about, for example, making one of the farming competitions win future Chia. We decided not to for various regulatory reasons. But once we have that regulatory certainty, we absolutely intend to use the pre-farm to do things like a special farming reward for a block that will happen on a holiday day, or doubling farming rewards during a specific month. Those are definitely the kinds of things we want to be able to do with the pre-farm. We also, depending on exactly which route we take to the public markets, in many of them, we can make it so that early farmers will be able to, you know, sign a message proving they're an early farmer and get an allocation at the opening price of our offering. Again, we're not 100% sure which of the kind of various routes we'll take. You know, things like a direct listing don't really offer that same capability, where a more traditional IPO style does. You know, SPAC is a similar sort of thing, though there's some different dynamics where people can get in a much more kind of organized way that the stock doesn't run away from you when you try to buy in. But it is very much our intent to get the farming community, the developer community, able to go to Robinhood or whoever replaces Robinhood after recent events, and, you know, press a button and buy our stock.
Of course, the biggest reward for being an early farmer is farming rewards. You will never have a lower work difficulty than you do right after network launch.
Yeah, and this is important. A lot of people are kind of asking a question around, will the pre-farm hit the market and drive down the price? And the answer is that's not in our interest. And we can't do that until after we've gone public from our perspective. We think the way the regulatory landscape lurks, that it would be a bad idea for us to sell tokens for an investment of money. And as such, when we say that, look, the farmers are going to set the price, as Chia starts to become available on various exchanges, the only people who will have a saleable supply of Chia are you guys who are farming. So it's going to be a question for you about where you want to let go of Chia at. You know, we in many ways are then trailing you. Our company will have a valuation. It kind of depends on where our coin price goes, but it's really dictated by that coin price. It's not dictated by the company or the market there. So questions about why are we a superior proof of capacity coin, storage coin, with a question about Filecoins. I think it's kind of important to explain that one, Bram.
Yeah, well, so Filecoin is a very different thing. I'm really a little hazy on exactly what Filecoin's latest claims are, but if we summarize a bit here, Filecoin is making it so that you actually are storing archival data, like stuff is being stored to the network, like people are archiving things, and that and you're getting reward for doing that archiving. Now, this has the fundamental, has actually a long list of fundamental problems, which they don't have good answers for. But one of the big obvious differences is that for that one to farm, you need to download a ton of stuff. You need to archive all of these things. That requires a huge amount of bandwidth to do. And for Chia, it's not like that. Chia, you want to start farming, you do your plotting, that can be done completely offline. And then you just connect to the network and you start your plotting, and all you really need is a full node. Actually, you don't technically even need that in order to be connected to the network and do it. So the actual process of farming in Chia is fundamentally much more lightweight, on top of it being a fundamentally sound consensus algorithm that we have, that it really is a proper Nakamoto consensus. It's not subject to a whole bunch of deep types of attacks along the lines of like, hey, I'm just gonna store in the network a bunch of garbage data that looks like it's encrypted data, but actually it's really just nonsense that came off of my seed. And I am cheating now and I don't even have to store it because I have the seed, so I can just regenerate it whenever. There's a whole bunch of attacks along those lines on that type of system. And we're not making claims to being archival storage. Our proof of space is just space. And it is using up the space for nothing useful at that moment, but it's, the space is still there. So the idea is you do it for with things that are generally over provisioned or storage that would otherwise be bad. And if it's over provisioned at any time, you can just delete your plots and move on from there. And we're trying to make it so that the act of plotting is as lightweight as it possibly can be and really scales well. In terms of the actual, there are other things that people have done that are proof of space things. There's a bunch of just much more fundamentally sound technology we've based our stuff on. So using proofs of time proves to be fairly critical to really fundamentally stopping a bunch of grinding attacks on the thing. Also, just our proofs of space themselves are just a much, much better construction. That Chia proofs of space, you make your plot file, and then the actual act of doing lookups and generating your proofs of space is extremely, extremely lightweight. And the proofs that it generates are canonical. So it's just for deep and interesting computer science reasons, is a much, much more sound proof of space technique than other people are using.
So kind of question about legacy and controls. The questions in the general sense of, Bram, before we ask you to look both ways before crossing the street, what happens if you get hit by a bus? Do your kids force the company to sell off all the Chia?
Why is everyone always talking about me getting hit by a bus?
It's the standard founder thing.
Yeah. So I forget how much, if any, super voting my shares have, but
they don't.
Huh?
They're common. They don't.
They're common. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if we're a public company, then, in the event of my passing, or even without my passing, the company still has a board. It still has lots of other shareholders. That shareholding will be reasonably distributed among multiple entities. And I will be, diversifying over time.
For people who haven't kind of seen this happen in a public company, when the big founder has a big chunk of stock and dies or retires, you don't really see that stuff get voted much. It basically goes out to your foundation or your kids, and it's really, the voting rights are independent, and it's something we may look at doing somewhat over short terms. But the key is actually the independent directors. And so with that, Chuck, I'm going to hand it to you to kind of explain why a majority of the independent directors has a lot of control in the distribution of and how we use the preform.
So the role of the board is to exercise control from to serve the shareholders in a sense, and to oversee executive management. And so we will, I think the plan is to add at least two more independent directors, which will give the non-executive directors effective control over the voting at the board level. I'm sorry, Gene, you asked something specific about, what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, I was just saying, how will that impact changing our controls around whether we can distribute or manage the preform?
Yeah, well, so we'll have to, those decisions don't reside with any particular individual, right? The board can exercise control of those decisions at that level. And I think that's part of the plan, is to have those non-executive directors in place in order to to have that governance and control which will serve our interests well as we transition from private company to public company as well. And of course, as a public company, we'll have a substantial float, as as Bram mentioned. The influence of any particular shareholder will be diluted by the amount of public company shareholding that we have. And as the company grows and expands and takes on additional shareholders, our number of listed shares will increase, and so that the absolute total of shares that Bram holds may be the same, but they'll be diluted over the total shareholder base of the company.
That's also an important economic point. A lot of people are like, hey, why's the company got coins? Well, the reason is because we use the coins to raise fiat for now, which we need. And the persons who get diluted are the shareholders and not the farmers. The more coins get made in that process. And that's one of the key values of the corporate structure and the public company structure. Public companies have access to much less expensive capital. And so we can kind of get the most efficient capital to continue to invest in improving and going to market and getting other people to adopt Chia long term.
And there's also, I think, reading that question, and maybe this is too simplistic and everybody understands this, but again, we are forming a public entity. We're taking our private company, taking it public, selling stock in that. Bram's ownership of that, his equity ownership in the company, is a very different economic interest than the Chia or the pre-farm. Bram will not own any Chia. So when you say flooding the market, the question is it by selling his shares or selling Chia? The only way that we can sell the pre-farm or use the pre-farm is going to be down the road, majority of the independent directors, which does not include Bram. And after we get comfort from the SEC that use of that pre-farm meets the Hinman test and is not a violation of the securities laws. So it's very unlikely that we will even be able to use that other than lending Chia in the near future. Bram has no Chia himself to actually flood the market with. And so these corporate controls, which the public has not seen yet, but when we go public, you will see them. We have a stack this big of corporate controls, policies, procedures that the board of directors will adopt prior to going public. Those set constraints on the company's ability to do anything without the independent directors doing it. So the fear that a large shareholder founder could change his mind and dump stock or Chia or anything is simply legally not possible in our company.
Yeah.
It's also worth pointing out that it wouldn't be good for the company just as a for-profit institution to start dumping Chia, because that would depress the price of its own assets. Our model is not to just dump and get out. We're looking to build long-term value here. And for those purposes, it's better to hold on to everything.
I think related to this, there's a fear for people who kind of think about public companies in the EBITDA model, the profit model, that's the only way that public companies are valued. And there's a long history of silver mines and gold mines where the asset that it holds, even though it's not necessarily saleable today, is the thing that drives a large portion of the overall value. And with that in mind, Mitch, let's talk about, will we trade at par to the Chia on our balance sheet? Is there a way that if we get disconnected from the Chia on our balance sheet, we can potentially remedy that?
Right. Good question, Gene, because I think we all anticipate the value of our assets to be a big factor in the valuation of the company. And there should be a strong correlation between the value of the Chia on our balance sheet, the pre-farm, and our market cap as a public company. It will be the value of our assets on the balance sheet will be discounted by the market for a number of reasons. If we ever do sell Chia, we have to pay tax on that. There will be a tax effect. There will be a market impact of the value if we ever down the road start selling it. And so there will certainly be a discount from the actual value, very much like a energy company. that has reserves in the North Sea or in the Permian Basin in Texas. You may not have a well or a hole drilled or anything. You still have value, and it is based on the value of oil per barrel, even though it is not extracted yet. It's discounted because there's a lot to go through to get it out of the ground, both cost as well as regulatory risk and other things, and price risk. So, short answer, yeah, we will certainly trade parallel to the value of our Chia, but at a reduced amount of that. If our equity is ever grossly undervalued based on the value of our balance sheet, we have the ability to, as a public company, we can go and simply buy back stock with Chia and make a tender to shareholders saying, we think the stock's worth more than the market thinks it's worth, and buy it with that massive resource on our balance sheet, Chia, allowing shareholders, one, to get Chia, but two, restoring the price to what we think is a closer fair market value of the company.
Yeah, great. Bram, people are asking about, hey, I'm a little farmer. How do I compete with the data centers, and can I join a pool?
So everyone gets rewarded fairly as a farmer. Your rewards are exactly proportional to the amount of storage you put in the system. There's no economy of scale there, so you don't really need to compete per se. That's whatever, if you have spare storage lying around, you will get rewarded for that. As far as pooling goes, we've taken measures to make it so that pooling will be less important. We have many more reward events that happen. So even if you're a relatively small farmer, the kind of random nature of rewards giving will tend to get you something approximately equitably. If you have like 10 times as many events expected, it's much nicer to have your expected number of reward events to be 10 rather than 1, because your average number is much closer to your expected value. In that case, that said, people have asked us for pooling protocols. Making a good pooling protocol where you can switch between pools, which is the feature people really seem to want, is going to have to wait until after our network launch, just due to resources, partially because we need our transaction formats to be finalized before that can work, and partially just we only have so many hands here to build stuff. That said, yet even more lightweight way of building pool protocols, which don't require you set anything up in advance. The downside of being able to switch between pools is you need to have a transaction. So there's a smart coin on the blockchain that's pointing to the current pool that you're using for your farming. And we, by popular demand, we've designed and put in a hook so we can support that in the future. But what we're going to have kind of sooner is that having a pool is built into the actual farming protocol itself. So there's this distinction between like the rewards that go to the pool and the rewards that go to the farmer, and like the transaction fees go to the farmer, because that's what you want from an incentive standpoint. And that has the benefit that it's easier to add privacy features to it, and you don't even have to set up that one transaction on the blockchain to get it started in the first place. It's like super, super lightweight. So there's advantages to both approaches. We won't really have either of one built particularly well at the actual launch of transactions. Really high on our priority list, getting all this stuff beefed up and built out though.
Yeah, and 2 points about this. This is showing you how it was already pretty decentralized. This was not our original plan, and folks came and said, look, this is important, and, convinced the community, including us, that it was the right idea. Also, you can kind of track this on our Trello. If you go to GitHub and you hit the project tab, there's a link to our Trello board. It's totally public. You'll see what we think has to be done to launch, what we think has to be done to RC1, what has to fast follow, and you'll see pools at the top of the fast follow. Let's see. Interesting question. I think we can clarify, if we're a public company and you're a big shareholder and you're a big cheese, Bram, does that limit you and somehow how you can help develop or what development paths we take?
I'm not sure what the question means. I'm the grand poobah around here. So I have been and will continue to kind of set direction for development. We have a big enough team that I actually do very little code writing at this point.
I have written more code in the product than Bram has.
Yeah. I get excited when I get to write protocol specs, which I do. I've been coming up with a lot of the big ideas, a lot of the core concepts about how we do things I've been coming up with. And I've also been doing the executive product role where I'm really setting the big direction. Here are the products, here's how they work. So I've been, in doing the not day-to-day product and the not day-to-day architectural things with the details mostly delegated out. I think it's going to continue being that way in the future. We've got a good team, and I haven't been totally distracted with managerial company stuff. Thank you, Gene and Mitch, for that. Yeah, I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah, and I think the core point of the question, what we like about the corporate form is that the right decision for the blockchain is almost always the right decision for the company. Because, fundamentally, this is about having a superior technology that no one has to trust. And the faster and deeper we push that, the better it is for everybody. There's an interesting question in the general chat. I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. It's along the lines of, isn't the Chia blockchain and blockchains in general capable of kind of creating this third quasi-governmental entity that's independent from everybody? Well, I'll try to answer it and see if you catch what I think they're asking. Right now, you kind of have to trust somebody to do almost any transaction on the planet, right? But there is an opportunity to say that even nations don't have to trust each other and can do transactions in a trustless way. And that's another thing we like about our corporate form is that sooner or later, I don't think we need to have a corporation around Chia. There'll be a Red Hat style business that does software and services that we probably will have spun out at some point. So our shareholders will still own that, and that business will be, very much about its profitability and its revenue creation. And by the way, that's also a valid point about when you talk about the valuation of Chia. Until that happens, at some point we may cross a point where that business actually adds total value, and in fact, we trade to a premium of the balance sheet value of our Chia. But the neat thing about the corporate form is we can slowly but surely distribute all these assets to the shareholder base. And so ultimately, you may have a well-endowed trust fund to keep a core group of developers paid, and then you have a lending business that went out to the shareholders, and you have a software business that went out to the shareholders.
Yeah, well, it's important to know when we're talking about engineering, we don't talk about governance very much around here. On this call, we're talking about governance in terms of our corporate governance, but in terms of the running of the network, there are a lot of projects that are thinking of going to proof of stake. And they run into all the problems in proof of stake. And then they start talking about how great all these ideas for governance that they have are, even though they're not that great, as if this is a really good thing. And really, they're bragging about a problem that they have. This is kind of like banks bragging about all the trust that they have. It's like, no, the whole point should be we don't have to trust you. That's the whole point of cryptocurrencies, is there's no entity that you're trusting. I mean, to the extent that one has overcome these problems, maybe that's an accomplishment there, but you really just want to not have the problems in the first place for the most part.
Yep. And also, I think it's important to note that, Bram and I have always talked about Bram having kind of less total influence at the same point in history that we're at with Linux, where Linux does not have less. We hope to build a crew of folks both inside and outside who own various pieces of this and help drive it forward. And we're already seeing that. We've got quite a few folks who are bringing us PRs and various different of their specialties. And, it's a little arbitrary, and that it would not surprise us if some of those people come inside, and we've done that already a couple of times. But, it's a meritocracy about what's the best technological decision, not some other plan. It's how can we get there? Let's see, Bram. Interesting question. What did you learn from BitTorrent that you're bringing to Chia?
Oh man. Well, in terms of just an immediate pragmatic thing, I delegated a lot of control and vision in the company of BitTorrent early. I created BitTorrent basically on my own and then formed a company, and I had very little confidence in my own abilities at that time. So I brought on other people, and that didn't work so well. I've gained a lot more confidence since then. I'm in many ways a much more together person than I was back then. So I just, really running a tight ship that's well managed around here. In many ways, what we're doing, it parallels what I did with BitTorrent, that we're building a tool that's a very specific tool. It does very specific things. It's making clear claims about what those things are and are not. And, I did a good job of staying out of trouble with BitTorrent because of that. Both in terms of staying out of trouble and being successful by keeping the scope under control to things that are actually achievable. So we're doing all those same things here, but with more management experience and maturity.
Yes. Kind of an interesting follow on. In each of your respective areas, what are the major challenges and what are you worrying about? Let's start with Mitch.
The SEC and the regulators in the United States have been very ambiguous and non-bright line in their approach to this new world. And I guess one of the concerns that we have is just the ambiguity of the regulatory regime that we enter into after launch. We're going to be prudent, we're going to be careful, we're going to obey the securities laws. Life would be easier for us and we could accelerate a lot of our business models if there were some brighter lines as to the way the regulators, for everyone from the SEC to FINRA to the IRS, are going to treat digital currencies. So that governmental ambiguity is my biggest kind of concern.
Chuck.
Yeah, I guess I would echo that to a certain extent. I mean, things we can control and can't control. So should we be worried about the macroeconomic environment? I mean, certainly it's going to have a massive influence on, timing and success, but there's little about that we can control. So I think, within the sphere of things that we can control, I think my thinking is similar to what, along the lines of what Mitch is thinking. There's a lot of ambiguous regulation, and it's not just securities law, it's financial services regulation and tax law and a lot of other things. We have to navigate through that primordial soup of ambiguity, get to institutional investors and get to, everybody that we need to work through to get to the front door for a public offering. And that's a lot of work. And so that ambiguity that surrounds us is a bit of a concern, but I'm a strong believer in a proactive approach that we, work with the regulators in a way that, informs and enlightens them, gets them bought into the strategy of the company. And I think I think the right people around the table to do that. And then it becomes achievable and we can de-risk it. But I think my concerns are largely around the same areas that Mitch has already noted.
Bram?
I'm just focused on getting our product shipping.
Yeah, too.
Yeah, I get to be the guy who crosses over between these two realms. I worry about three things. I first want to echo that the SEC issues are absolutely tantamount. They play into how we fund the company in the very near term, and so we kind of have to get certain comfort there. I do think they're tractable. We've had conversations in the past with them. They have been generally supportive, but regimes change and things change. I'm excited about who's coming in to the SEC. I think that's going to be a positive for us in our plan. I certainly worry about shipping code. As much as Bram sets the direction, I'm the one who has to get it out the door. We've become a pretty good organization doing that. We're on a weekly release schedule right now. We are very excited with beta 27. It finally is approaching the quality that we want it at. Still a lot of room to improve, but I think we're probably at a release candidate for our next release, which is saying something. But I also, I'll put it this way, and this is probably a personal thing. I worry about building buzz. I think I overworry it because we're starting to see all the right signs. Friends of friends are starting to ask about Chia, and we don't know why, and that's great. Look, our core marketing plan is the Satoshi marketing plan. Everybody can farm. Please come farm. You're going to be our best ambassadors to your friends and neighbors and others as we, build up the validator network, become the decentralized network we want to be. I mean, look, we've been a top 15 blockchain by node count, and there's no real incentive to do that. We think that's going to go up, not down. And then we start to shift our focus a little bit towards educating developers about the positives of Chialisp. And so, Bram, can you actually talk a little bit about why Chialisp is superior to other offerings?
Yeah. So we've taken. I spent a lot of time going over how does Bitcoin do things, why, discussing it with people, kind of reworked it from the ground up, keeping all the same fundamental concepts there. So we're very much in the UTXO set model, or we're calling it the coin set model, but it's like in Unix, everything is a file. In Chia, everything is a coin. And so the idea here is we do support Turing complete computation, but it's ephemeral. All that happens is a coin gets spent and a new coin is created. So the persistent data held by the blockchain is just, here are the coins that are currently out there, which makes it so that, first off, this is a really auditable system. The whole environment and the actual Chia programs are running in a truly no side effects, very, very simple Lisp type language. So the whole environment is really designed to be as nailed down and auditable and clear about what it's doing as it possibly can be all the way through, which is very, very important for a blockchain. And then because everything is a coin, everything interoperates. Like all the smart coins can communicate with each other and put rules on what the other things do. And it makes it so that you have things like a colored coin where you can have vaults in your colored coin. Whatever custody arrangements you want to do in your colored coin, you can just go ahead and do, which is very, very different from like ERC20 tokens, which are really just account balances that are in their own walled garden and don't interoperate with anything else and don't have their own smart functionality.
So follow up to that, are there any advantages to that to implement Lightning like layer 2s?
There are. That gets pretty involved. It's pretty deep in the weeds. You can do a pretty good Lightning network on Bitcoin. You can do it better in Chia, mostly because you have covenants. So you can, there's just a bunch of things that are a lot more straightforward. You can start adding features like having a channel that can only change its balances at a certain rate. So you can have a relatively large amount of funds locked up in a channel without being quite so worried about your counterparty stealing them from you. Yeah, mostly you wind up doing things a lot more based on straightforward covenants rather than having secure hash based atomic swaps through everything. But it gets pretty deep in the weeds pretty fast in that. It's better, but not completely different.
We're starting to wrap up, but I want to ask a couple more questions. Chuck, during the process of getting to know the company and Chia, what were the highlights to you that made it interesting to take on a fiduciary responsibility here?
So many things. I think I touched upon some of these in the introduction. I mean, for me, I've been fairly selective about, well, that's probably understating it, about getting involved in the crypto space. And I waited until there was something that struck me as being completely transformative, and stunning in its design. And so I think for me, as I touched upon earlier, a lot of it was I think the environmental stuff was, I think, a real pull for me, because of the massive and asymmetrical to output energy consumption that you get with proof of work type validation. And I like the opportunity, with a clean piece of paper, how would we do it differently? And why wouldn't we do it differently? And also just going through all of the features that, that are sort of intrinsic to the design, better security, on-chain programming language, scalability, all of that stuff, I think, was a real magnet for me in terms of enthusiasm. So I guess that sort of the gestalt of all that stuff is the answer to your question.
Great, thank you. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. There are a few questions outstanding. Please feel free to ask those again in the general chat of the Keybase. The Keybase link is on the front page at chia.net if you need to find that. We will be doing some more of these on different topics. One of the topics I think is going to be upcoming is on plotting and storage, and I think we may have a special guest from a major storage manufacturer who will be available to answer questions. I've also asked some of our whales if they'd be willing to show up, and we may have a few who are willing to sit around and chat. We are going to be playing with when to do these. One of the options is for us in the Pacific time to stay up late and then be available for both Europe and Asia at the same time. But we'll be working on that a bit. Now that our software development is kind of settling and we're on the downslope to release, we have a little more time to do things like this, and also expect some more YouTube how-to videos and other things. If you're just starting out, the beginner channel on our Keybase is the place to ask the question you're scared to ask, and we invite you to ask that question. Thanks, everybody. We will be available online on Keybase, and have a great weekend.